When Liam discovers his greedy boss, Donovan, has been secretly stealing from employees' paychecks and using company funds to finance his lavish lifestyle, he decides enough is enough. Armed with determination and evidence of corruption, Liam sets out to expose the tyrant, rallying his co-workers and teaming up with a hard-hitting journalist. But just as the walls start closing in on Donovan, the ruthless CEO strikes back with a shocking counterattack, fabricating a scandal that threatens to destroy Liam's reputation. As Liam races to clear his name, he uncovers an even darker secret buried in Donovan's past, one that will ruin not just his career, but his entire life. This is a gripping tale of betrayal, revenge, and justice served in the most unexpected way. I never thought I'd see my life turn into a storm of betrayal and secrets, but it all started with something as small as a missing couple $100. At the time, I was just another overworked and underpaid employee trying to climb the corporate ladder at a small marketing firm. Fresh out of college, I had landed the job after months of rejection emails. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, well, it was supposed to. At first, everything seemed fine. My co-workers were nice enough, the office coffee was drinkable, and the work was manageable. Sure, our boss, Mr. Donovan, was a nightmare, but I figured every office had one of those. He wasn't just your average demanding boss, he was the kind of person who thrived on power trips. He belittled employees during meetings, treated assistants like his personal servants, and made sure every success in the company had his name stamped all over it, regardless of who actually did the work. But I could handle that. Or at least, I thought I could. What I couldn't handle was finding out that the man was outright stealing from us. It all started on a Friday afternoon, when I was going through my online banking app. I had just gotten paid that morning, and as I scrolled through my balance, something felt off. My paycheck was smaller than usual. Not by much, just a couple $100, but it was enough to make me wonder if there had been a mistake. Hey, do you ever notice issues with payroll? I asked Sarah, a coworker who sat in the cubicle next to mine. She had been with the company for a few years and was my go-to whenever I had questions about how things worked. She frowned. Why? Did something happen? Yeah, my paycheck came in short. Like, $200 short. Sarah sighed, her lips pressing into a thin line. That's not the first time I've heard that. Wait, really? She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. I had the same issue a few months ago. I went to HR, but they just gave me some excuse about new tax deductions. Honestly, I didn't have the energy to fight it. It's not just me, though, Mark from accounting said his was short too. A lot of us have noticed it. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Did anyone try to look into it? She gave a bitter laugh. You kidding? Donovan's got HR wrapped around his finger. No one wants to risk their job for a couple $100. That night, I couldn't let it go. If it had just been me, maybe I would have chalked it up to an error. But Sarah was right, Donovan ran the company like it was his personal kingdom, and HR was practically useless. If he was skimming money off employee paychecks, no one was going to stop him. No one but me. The following week, I started paying closer attention to everything around me. I checked my pay stubs, compared them to previous months, and even combed through my tax withholdings to see if there had been any changes. There weren't. I started quietly asking around, and the more people I talked to, the clearer it became, this wasn't an isolated incident. Almost everyone had noticed their paychecks were a little lighter than they should have been. But no one had done anything about it. One evening, while I was staying late to finish up a campaign report, I overheard something that made my blood boil. Donovan's office was next to the break room, and the walls were paper thin. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his voice carried loud enough for anyone to hear. He was on the phone, and his tone was casual, too casual for what he was saying. Yeah, it's a little extra padding, he said, laughing. Pocket change. They'll never figure it out. Besides, they should be thanking me for giving them jobs in the first place. I froze. My hands clenched into fists as the words sunk in. I didn't need to hear anything else to know exactly what he was talking about. He was skimming off our paychecks, and he didn't even care enough to hide it. He thought we were too stupid or too scared to fight back. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The next day, I started gathering evidence. I knew I couldn't go to HR, they were in Donovan's pocket. I couldn't confront him directly either, he'd find a way to fire me on the spot. So I needed proof, something undeniable that I could use to expose him. I began by saving every email related to payroll. Whenever someone complained about missing money, I asked if they had screenshots of their pay stubs. A few coworkers sent me copies, which I carefully stored on a USB drive. But the real breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Donovan had a bad habit of leaving sensitive documents lying around his office. One evening, I noticed a spreadsheet sitting on his desk as I walked by. My heart raced as I realized what it was, a detailed breakdown of employee salaries, deductions, and, most damningly, how much he was pocketing from each paycheck. I knew I only had seconds before someone could walk in. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the document. It wasn't perfect, the angle was a little off, but it was enough to read the numbers. I slipped away before anyone noticed, my heart pounding like a drum. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the photo on my phone, reading and rereading the numbers. There was no denying it now. Donovan was stealing from us, tens of thousands of dollars over the course of a year. And he thought he was untouchable. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to dig deeper, to find out just how far his corruption went. So I started paying attention to everything, his expenses, his meetings, his habits. That's when I noticed something strange. Donovan always had a new luxury toy. One month, it was a brand new Rolex. The next, it was a high-end sports car. And yet, our company wasn't exactly raking in millions. How was he affording all of this? I started asking questions, discreetly of course. Sarah told me Donovan often billed his personal expenses to the company, claiming they were business-related. A lavish dinner. A client meeting. A week-long trip to Hawaii. A conference. He was bleeding the company dry, and no one was doing anything to stop him. I realized then that this wasn't just about the stolen paychecks. Donovan's entire operation was built on lies and fraud. And I was going to bring it all crashing down around him. I knew I had to tread carefully. Donovan was ruthless, and if he got even the slightest hint that I was onto him, he'd squash me like a bug. But knowing what he was doing, and the arrogance with which he did it, made my blood boil. I couldn't sit back and watch him get away with stealing from us any longer. I needed to make my next move. After snapping the photo of the spreadsheet and collecting payroll discrepancies from my coworkers, I decided to dig deeper into Donovan's shady financial practices. The problem was, I didn't have access to the company's financial records, or so I thought. That changed one night when an opportunity landed in my lap. It was after hours, and I was staying late to wrap up a client presentation. Most of the office was empty, except for a few night owls and, as always, Donovan. His door was ajar, and I could hear him on the phone, his voice dripping with fake charm as he sweet-talked a potential investor. I ignored it at first, focusing on my work, but then I heard the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. Curiosity got the better of me. Peeking out from my cubicle, I saw Donovan walking toward the elevator, his phone pressed to his ear. He had his coat slung over his arm, and it seemed like he was leaving for the night. But here's the thing about Donovan, he was so full of himself that he didn't think he needed to lock his office door when he left. My heart pounded as I crept toward his office. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, and I froze, listening for any sound of him returning. Nothing. I slipped inside, my pulse racing. This was risky, stupidly risky, but I couldn't pass up the chance to find more evidence. Donovan's desk was a mess of papers, coffee cups, and pens, but what caught my eye was his computer. The screen was still on, the desktop open. He must have been in such a rush to leave that he hadn't logged out. The temptation was too much to resist. I sat down and moved the mouse, the screen coming to life. My hands were shaking as I navigated through his files, trying to find anything related to payroll or finances. After a few minutes of searching, I hit the jackpot, a folder labeled Expenses. Inside, I found invoice after invoice, dozens of them, detailing lavish purchases billed to the company. There was a $10,000 business dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, a $15,000 retreat at a luxury spa resort, and even a $40,000 charge for what was listed as client gifts. But the most damning files were receipts for personal purchases, designer suits, first-class plane tickets, jewelry, all labeled as miscellaneous business expenses. I quickly transferred everything onto a USB drive I had brought with me, my hands flying over the keyboard. Every second felt like an eternity, and I kept glancing at the door, half expecting Donovan to burst in and catch me. Once I had everything I needed, I slipped out of his office and returned to my desk, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. That night, I reviewed everything I had collected. Between the payroll discrepancies, the falsified invoices, and the spreadsheet detailing his skimming scheme, I now had enough evidence to bury him. But I didn't want to stop there. I wanted to make sure that when I took him down, there would be no way for him to talk his way out of it. The next step was figuring out how to expose him. Going to HR was still out of the question, they'd either tip him off or sweep it under the rug. I needed a way to make the evidence public, to force the board of directors and the authorities to take action. That's when I had an idea. A few months earlier, our company had worked with a local journalist on a PR campaign. Her name was Melissa Hart, and she had a reputation for digging deep into stories and exposing corporate corruption. If anyone could help me, it was her. I reached out to Melissa anonymously, using a burner email account I had set up. I explained the situation in vague terms, telling her I had evidence of financial misconduct at a mid-sized marketing firm and asking if she'd be interested in hearing more. To my relief, she replied the same day, saying she was intrigued and asking for a meeting. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop on the other side of town. I was nervous, paranoid, even, but I knew this was the best way to get the ball rolling. When I arrived, Melissa was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a notebook and a laptop. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "So," she said as I slid into the seat across from her, "you've got a story for me?" I nodded, pulling out the USB drive. "I have proof that the CEO of my company has been stealing from his employees and using company funds for personal expenses." Her eyebrows shot up, but she didn't interrupt. I handed her the USB drive, explaining everything I had uncovered, the missing paycheck money, the fraudulent invoices, the spreadsheet from Donovan's office. She listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her seat, a thoughtful expression on her face. "This is big. If everything you've shown me checks out, this could be a major story." "That's what I'm hoping," I said. "But there's more. He's not just stealing money, he's also abusive. He manipulates people, takes credit for their work, and runs the company like his own personal fiefdom. I want to make sure he pays for all of it." Melissa nodded. "I get it. But we need to be strategic about this. If we go public with this story too soon, he might be able to spin it or bury it. We need to make sure there's enough pressure from every angle, media, legal, and internal. Are you willing to keep gathering information if I need more?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I was already in too deep to back out now. Over the next few weeks, Melissa and I worked together to build an airtight case against Donovan. She verified the evidence I had provided, reaching out to some of my coworkers to confirm their stories. I kept feeding her updates, sneaking around the office to collect more files and emails. The more we uncovered, the worse Donovan looked. But I wasn't just relying on the media to take him down. I also started reaching out to the company's board of directors, anonymously sending them snippets of the evidence. I knew they wouldn't act unless their own reputations or profits were at risk, so I made sure to include the most damning pieces, the fraudulent invoices and proof of stolen wages. I was playing a dangerous game, but I could feel the walls closing in on Donovan. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Things began to unravel faster than I expected. The pressure was building, and Donovan didn't even know it yet. Every day I walked into the office, I felt like I was carrying a ticking time bomb in my pocket. My USB drive was now my most valuable possession. It held his secrets, his lies, his crimes. And soon, the whole world would see them. Melissa had already begun drafting the article. It wasn't just a simple exposé about a greedy CEO, it was a full-scale investigation into corporate corruption, abuse of power, and the exploitation of employees. The more evidence I uncovered, the more explosive the story became. Melissa promised that once it was published, Donovan would have no way out. But I knew the media alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to strike him from all angles: his reputation, his finances, his standing with the board of directors. I wanted to make sure that when he fell, there was no getting back up. And for that, I needed my coworkers on my side. It started with Sarah. She was the first person I told about my plan, not everything, just enough to get her to trust me. We met after work at a small diner a few blocks from the office, where I laid out what I had found. "I've got proof," I said, sliding my phone across the table to show her a photo of the spreadsheet. "He's been stealing from us, skimming off our paychecks and using company funds for his own lifestyle." Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the photo. "Oh my God. I knew something was off, but this is insane. I'm working with a journalist to expose him," I continued. "But I need more people to back me up. If enough of us come forward, we can file a class action lawsuit. We can get our money back, and make sure he's held accountable." Sarah hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Liam, this is huge. But, what if he finds out? What if he comes after us?" "He won't," I assured her. "Not if we stick together. He's only powerful because we've let him get away with this for so long. But if we fight back, if we show him we're not afraid, he can't win." She nodded slowly, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "All right. I'm in." One by one, I approached other coworkers I trusted: Mark from accounting, Tanya in marketing, even a few members of the IT team. Some were hesitant at first, worried about the risks, but once they saw the evidence, they couldn't deny what Donovan had done. By the end of the week, I had a small but solid group of allies ready to take action. Together, we began preparing the groundwork for the lawsuit. Mark helped me calculate the total amount Donovan had stolen from all of us, while Tanya drafted a letter to the board demanding accountability. The IT team quietly accessed additional payroll records, confirming that the discrepancies went back over 3 years. As we worked behind the scenes, Donovan remained oblivious. He still strutted around the office like a king, barking orders and flashing his smug grin. But cracks were starting to show. The board of directors had begun asking questions, thanks to the anonymous emails I had sent them, and Donovan was clearly feeling the heat. I overheard him arguing with one of the board members on the phone, his voice laced with frustration. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I've done nothing wrong. If anyone's spreading lies about me, they'll regret it." I smirked to myself, knowing he was starting to sweat. The tipping point came 2 weeks later, when Melissa called me with some incredible news. "The article's ready," she said, excitement crackling in her voice. "We're publishing it tomorrow morning. Once it goes live, it's going to blow up. Are you ready for this?" Absolutely, I replied, though my stomach was doing flips. I wasn't just ready, I was desperate to see Donovan's empire crumble. That night, I stayed up late, refreshing the news site over and over, waiting for the story to drop. At exactly 7 a.m., it appeared, CEO accused of stealing wages, falsifying records, and abusing power. Melissa had done an incredible job. The article was detailed, damning, and impossible to ignore. It included interviews with my co-workers, who had remained anonymous, screenshots of the invoices and payroll records, and even a timeline of Donovan's most egregious abuses. Within hours, the story was everywhere. It spread like wildfire on social media, with people sharing it and commenting on how disgusted they were. Former employees came forward with their own horror stories about Donovan, adding fuel to the fire. By noon, the hashtag Donovan Exposed was trending. The office was in chaos. Donovan stormed in, his face red and his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. He called an emergency meeting in the conference room, where he tried to spin the story as a misunderstanding. "These allegations are baseless," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "This is a smear campaign designed to damage my reputation. I've always acted in the best interests of this company." No one believed him. The murmurs in the room made that clear. My co-workers exchanged glances, and a few even smirked, knowing the truth. Donovan's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and he could feel it. By the end of the day, the board of directors had called their own emergency meeting. Donovan was summoned, but instead of the usual swagger he carried, he looked visibly shaken. I didn't have access to the meeting, but Sarah later told me that the board had confronted him with the evidence I had sent them, as well as the backlash from the article. He was practically begging, Sarah said, barely containing her glee. He kept saying it wasn't his fault, that someone was trying to sabotage him. But the board wasn't buying it. They put him on leave while they conduct an internal investigation. You know what that means, right? It means he's done, I said, unable to hide my grin. And it's only going to get worse. The next day, we filed the class action lawsuit. With the support of the co-workers I had rallied, we demanded compensation for the stolen wages, plus damages for the stress and financial hardship Donovan's scheme had caused. Our lawyer assured us that the evidence we had gathered was overwhelming. Donovan wouldn't stand a chance in court. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one final card to play. Over the past few weeks, I had quietly reached out to some of the company's biggest clients, anonymously sending them pieces of evidence. I knew that if they pulled their contracts, it would cripple the company financially, and take Donovan down with it. It worked. By the end of the week, 2 of our largest clients had announced they were terminating their contracts, citing ethical concerns. More followed, and the company's revenue began to plummet. Donovan's reign of terror was officially over. As the fallout from the article, the lawsuit, and the client exodus unfolded, I thought Donovan's story had reached its natural conclusion. He was out on leave, facing investigations, and about to be buried under a mountain of legal trouble. For the first time in years, the office felt lighter. People whispered about a fresh start, about how we'd rebuild without Donovan's toxic presence poisoning the air. I thought it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. 2 weeks after the story broke, I arrived at work to find the office buzzing. People were huddled in groups, speaking in hushed tones, their faces pale with shock. I dropped my bag at my desk and turned to Sarah, who was practically glued to her phone. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling a prickle of unease. "Check your email," she said without looking up. Donovan just made a statement. My stomach sank. What could he possibly say to defend himself now? I opened my email and found a link to a press release Donovan had sent to every employee, every client, and even the media. The headline alone made my heart stop. Former CEO claims whistleblower orchestrated the scandal for personal gain. My throat went dry as I skimmed the statement. Donovan wasn't denying the allegations. Instead, he was twisting the narrative, painting himself as a victim of a personal vendetta. He claimed that I had orchestrated the entire situation to climb the corporate ladder and destroy his reputation. According to him, I had falsified documents, doctored evidence, and manipulated my co-workers into filing the lawsuit. The kicker: he provided evidence. Attached to the press release were copies of emails and messages that appeared to show me boasting about taking him down and making myself a hero. One email even suggested that I had been siphoning company funds to frame him. The timestamps and language were eerily close to my own, but I knew the messages were fake. Donovan was trying to take me down with him. Panic gripped me as I looked around the office. People were staring at me, some with confusion, others with suspicion. Even Sarah, who had been by my side through all of this, avoided my gaze. "I didn't write those emails," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Liam," Sarah said, her tone cautious, "you have to admit, this looks bad. He has timestamps, email headers. If you didn't write them, how did he get this?" "I don't know," I said, frustration rising in my chest. "But you know me, Sarah. Do you really think I would do something like this?" She hesitated, and that hesitation cut deeper than I expected. For the rest of the day, the office was a war zone. Some people sided with me, insisting Donovan was just lashing out in desperation. Others weren't so sure. The lawsuit was still moving forward, but Donovan's accusations had thrown everything into chaos. My name was trending online now, not as a hero, but as a potential villain. I needed to clear my name. That night, I called Melissa, the journalist who had written the original article. She picked up on the first ring. "I saw the press release," she said before I could even speak. "It's bad, Liam. He's throwing everything he's got at you." "Everything he's got is fake," I said. "You believe me, right?" "Of course I do," she said firmly. "But belief isn't enough. We need to prove it." Melissa and I spent the next 2 days combing through the evidence Donovan had presented. The fake emails were shockingly convincing, but there were inconsistencies. Subtle details, like formatting differences in the email headers and phrases I'd never use, hinted that they were fabrications. Then Melissa uncovered the smoking gun. Deep in the metadata of one of the emails, Melissa found traces of a ghostwriting software, an AI tool often used to mimic someone's writing style. It was the same tool Donovan had used in the past to automate corporate communications. Melissa cross-referenced the metadata with the company's software purchase records and found proof that Donovan's personal account had been used to generate the fake emails. We had him. Again. But this time, I wanted to make sure he couldn't twist the narrative any further. Melissa suggested we release the findings publicly, but I had a better idea. I wanted Donovan to see his downfall with his own eyes. The board of directors had called a special meeting to address the scandal, and I managed to secure a spot on the agenda to present my side. Donovan was there, looking smug as ever, even though he was officially on leave. He sat at the head of the table, his suit immaculate, his posture confident, as if he still owned the place. I stood up and addressed the room, my voice steady despite the fury bubbling inside me. "I'm here to clear my name," I said, meeting Donovan's eyes. "And to show you all the lengths this man will go to in order to save himself." I connected my laptop to the projector and began my presentation. I walked the board through the evidence Melissa and I had uncovered, showing how Donovan had used ghostwriting software to create the fake emails. I demonstrated the discrepancies in the metadata and presented the purchase records tying the software directly to him. The room was silent as I wrapped up. Donovan's face had gone pale, his smug grin replaced with a clenched jaw. "This isn't just about clearing my name," I said, my voice rising. "This is about showing you who Donovan really is. He stole from us. He lied to us. And now he's willing to destroy an innocent employee to protect himself." One of the board members turned to Donovan, her expression icy. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Donovan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, he looked powerless. The board voted unanimously to terminate Donovan's employment that same day. They also handed over all the evidence to the authorities, including the proof of his attempts to frame me. But the final blow came a week later. As the lawsuit progressed, Donovan's personal financial records were subpoenaed. And buried deep within those records was a secret I never saw coming. Donovan had been embezzling money not just from the company, but from his own family. It turned out he had been siphoning funds from a trust set up for his 2 teenage daughters, money that was supposed to pay for their college education. The media had a field day with the revelation, painting him as not just a corrupt CEO, but a man who had betrayed his own children for his greed. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. In the end, Donovan lost everything: his job, his reputation, and the respect of his own family. He fled town after the lawsuit was settled, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would take years to clean up. As for me, I came out of the ordeal stronger than ever. My name was cleared, the lawsuit was a success, and I even got a promotion at the company under its new leadership. But most importantly, I learned something. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with all the power. It's the one who knows how to take it away.